January 24th, 1945, Alsace. A German soldier fell dead in the snow. Then another. Then 3 more. In the minutes that followed, 50 German soldiers would fall. Not from bullets, but from artillery explosions that seemed to know exactly where each man was stepping. The German commanders knew. There was a forward observer somewhere, seeing everything, calling in each shot. But where? They scoured the frozen field. They passed within 4 meters of a shallow ditch. Some came so close they almost stepped on it. But they never saw the 5'5", 120-pound man lying there with a field telephone. Because he wasn't breathing like a soldier. He was breathing like a turkey hunter. How did a technique used to stay invisible to birds with the best eyesight in nature transform a Kentucky farmer into the deadliest observer of World War II? To understand how Garlin Murl Conner was able to do this, you need to understand where he was and what he was fighting against. January 1945. The war in Europe was entering its final phase. The Allies had liberated France. They had reached the German border. They were just a few kilometers from the Rhine River, the last natural barrier before the heart of Nazi Germany. But there was a problem. In the Alsace region near the town of Colmar, the German army still maintained a pocket of resistance. A heavily defended piece of territory. They called it the Colmar Pocket, and it was the last significant German position on the western side of the Rhine. The Americans needed to eliminate it, otherwise the Germans could use that position to flank the entire Allied advance. But the German army wasn't going to leave without a fight. On January 24, 1945, they launched a desperate counterattack. 600 infantry soldiers, 6 Mark VI Tiger tanks, the most feared tanks of the war, and tank destroyers. Their objective was simple: break through the American defensive line, separate the units, and massacre the isolated battalion. On the American side, the 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division. Exhausted men. Many had been fighting for months without rest. They were spread across a defensive line too thin to hold back a German force of that size. It was David versus Goliath, and worse, the environment was killing them. The temperature was minus 10 degrees Celsius, the ground was frozen, snow covered everything. This wasn't just cold. It was the kind of cold that makes metal brittle, that freezes gun oil, that kills men in a few hours if they don't move. For the Germans, it was just another day in hell. But for one man in the 3rd Division, that cold was familiar. That snow was familiar. That frozen terrain was the Kentucky forest in winter, and he knew exactly how to hunt in it. And in the middle of that nightmare was a quiet farmer, Garlin Murl Conner, 5 feet 5 inches tall, 120 pounds, a small man with a frail appearance. If you saw him in a photograph, you wouldn't think he was a soldier. You'd think he was, well, exactly what he was, a poor farmer from Kentucky. Conner was born on June 2nd, 1919 in Erin, Kentucky, a rural area so isolated that most people had never seen a city. His family was poor, very poor. It was the era of the Great Depression. The Conner family had 5 children to feed and almost no money. So they hunted, not for sport, out of necessity, for survival. Garlin learned to shoot before he learned to read, and what did he hunt? Deer, rabbits, squirrels, birds, and the most challenging prey of all, wild turkeys. Now, if you've never hunted a wild turkey, you don't understand how difficult it is. Turkeys have the best eyesight of any bird in North America. They detect minimal movement, the blink of an eye, the twist of a wrist, at hundreds of meters away. If you move, they're gone. If you breathe wrong, they're gone. If you blink too much, they're gone. So, how do you hunt a wild turkey? You don't move. Garlin's father taught him a technique called still hunting. You choose your position, you camouflage yourself in the environment, and then you stay completely still. For hours, controlled breathing, zero body movement, you become part of the landscape, you disappear. Military witnesses who served with Conner later documented he knew the forest intimately. He moved without being detected. He disappeared into vegetation. He had a superhuman ability to remain motionless. And there was another trick. In the dense forests of Kentucky, it's easy to get lost, so hunters discreetly mark trees as they walk, small cuts, broken branches, marks that only they recognize. They create a trail back, so they can always find their way home. It's spatial navigation in hostile territory. Garlin Conner learned these skills hunting food for his family during the Great Depression, and in 1941, when he was 22 years old, he enlisted in the United States Army as a volunteer. He was sent to Europe, and for 28 months, almost 2.5 years, he was in continuous combat on the front lines. Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, the invasion of Sicily, Salerno, the bloody Battle of Anzio, southern France, Alsace, 10 major campaigns, 4 amphibious landings, wounded 7 times. And in each of these battles, Garlin Conner used the same tricks he had learned hunting turkeys and deer in the Kentucky forests. The army taught him to shoot, but his father had taught him to be invisible. The army taught him tactics, but the Kentucky forests had taught him to navigate hostile territory. The army made him a soldier, but the Great Depression had made him a survivor. And on January 24, 1945, all these skills would be put to the test. On the morning of January 24, 1945, Garlin Conner wasn't supposed to be in battle. He was recovering from a hip wound in a field hospital kilometers away from the front line. But when he heard the sound of German artillery, he knew what was happening. His battalion was under attack. His men were dying. So he escaped from the hospital. He stole a jeep, drove back to the front line, and arrived exactly when Major General Lloyd B. Ramsey was asking for a volunteer for a suicide mission. Someone needed to run to a forward observation position in the middle of German artillery fire and call in targets for American artillery. It was a death sentence. Everyone knew it. Garlin Conner raised his hand immediately. He grabbed 3 things: a spool of telephone wire, a field telephone, and a Thompson submachine gun. A companion, Private First Class Robert A. Dutill, volunteered to go with him, and then they ran. Conner ran 400 yards, 365 meters, across an open field while German artillery exploded around him. He was unspooling telephone wire as he ran, and here's the trick. He wasn't just laying the wire for communication, he was creating a hunting trail. Just as he marked trees when hunting deer in the Kentucky forests, he was using the telephone wire as a trail back. In combat, in hostile terrain, with smoke and explosions obscuring everything, that wire was his spatial orientation, communication and navigation in a single object. He ran 30 yards, 27 meters, beyond the American line. He was now in enemy territory. And then he found his position, a shallow irrigation ditch, only 30 centimeters deep. Part of his body was still exposed even when he lay down in it. Dutill stayed in another nearby ditch, and Conner connected the telephone. "Command, this is Conner. I'm in position, awaiting targets." And then he began to hunt. The Germans advanced, 600 men organized in attack waves, Tiger tanks roaring ahead, and Conner remained completely still, watching. He murmured coordinates into the phone: 300 meters northeast infantry formation, fire. Seconds later, 105mm artillery explosions tore through the German line. 400 meters east, Mark 6 tank, fire. Another explosion, another collapsed wave. The Germans knew there was an observer somewhere. They started searching. They scoured the field with binoculars. They fired machine gun bursts at suspicious areas. They sent patrols to sweep the area. In the second hour, Dutil was wounded. He retreated to another, more protected ditch. Conner stayed alone, and the Germans were getting closer. They passed within 20 meters, then 10 meters, then 5 meters. Some sources say they came within arm's reach, so close that Conner could have reached out and touched their boots, and they never saw him. Why? Because Garlin Conner wasn't breathing like a soldier. He was breathing like a turkey hunter. Controlled breathing. Zero movement. Fixed eyes. He had spent hours, days, weeks of his life learning to stay invisible to birds with the best eyesight in nature. German soldiers? They were easy. But there was a problem. The Germans were now so close that American artillery couldn't hit them without hitting Conner too. And that's when he made the decision. Hour 3, the Germans were 4.5 meters from Conner's ditch. He could hear them breathing, could hear their boots crushing the frozen snow, could hear German officers shouting orders. Over the phone, American command was desperate. "Conner, fall back. You're too close. We can't fire without hitting you." Garlin Conner looked at the Germans, looked at the American line behind him. He knew that if that force broke through, his battalion would be annihilated. Hundreds of Americans would die. And then he said the words that defined his life: "Blanket my position. Cover my position." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Conner, are you telling us to—" "Yes. Cover my position. Directly on top of me. Now." The official citation in his award file says, "Ordered friendly artillery to concentrate directly on his own position, having resolved to die if necessary to destroy the enemy advance." He had decided to die if necessary. On the other end of the line, the American artillery officer hesitated for a second, and then he gave the order. "All batteries, concentrate fire on Conner's coordinates. Execute." The sound started before the explosions, a growing whistle, a sharp roar tearing through the air, and then the world exploded. 105mm shells and 81mm mortars rained directly on Garlin Conner's position. The explosions were so intense, the earth shook. Metal fragments flew in all directions. The shockwave from the detonations was so strong it ripped the air from lungs. And Garlin Conner lay in the 30-centimeter ditch, completely motionless, while American artillery tried to kill him. The Germans, who were meters away, were caught in the hell. Men were thrown through the air. Bodies disappeared in clouds of earth and smoke. Screams were swallowed by the constant roar of explosions. The German formation collapsed. Officers shouted orders, but no one could hear. Soldiers ran in all directions, trying to escape the storm of steel. Tanks retreated, their crews blinded by smoke and debris. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence was deafening. The American line waited. No one knew if Conner was alive. The artillery had fallen so close it seemed impossible anyone could survive. And then the field telephone in the ditch crackled. "Command, this is Conner. Alive. Enemy retreating. Casualty count at least 50 dead, over 100 wounded. Attack collapsed. Line held." Garlin Conner had survived. He had called artillery fire on his own head, had lain in a shallow 30-centimeter ditch while shells exploded meters away. And he had walked away unscathed. Later that day, American patrols swept the battlefield. They found 50 German bodies. They found over 100 wounded. They found abandoned equipment, weapons, helmets, maps. And they found a shallow irrigation ditch 30 centimeters deep with a field telephone and a Thompson submachine gun inside it. The soldiers looked at that ditch, looked at the shell craters around it, some less than 5 meters away. And they couldn't understand how anyone could have survived there. But Garlin Conner wasn't surprised. He had spent his entire life learning to disappear. In the Kentucky forests, hunting turkeys, hunting deer, remaining completely still while birds with the best eyesight in nature passed centimeters from him. For him, this was just another day of hunting. Except this time, the prey was an entire army. But heroes don't walk away unscathed. Never. Garlin Conner didn't stop fighting on January 24th. 10 days later, on February 3rd, 1945, he led an urban assault. He personally killed 12 German soldiers and captured 75 prisoners. He earned his 4th Silver Star. He continued fighting until March 1945, until the end of the war in Europe. In total, during 28 months of continuous combat, Garlin Conner was wounded 7 times. 7 times he bled on foreign soil. 7 times he was sent to field hospitals. And 7 times he returned to the front line. When the war ended, he was the 2nd most decorated soldier of World War II, behind only Audie Murphy. 1 Medal of Honor, 1 Distinguished Service Cross, 4 Silver Stars, 4 Bronze Stars, 1 Purple Heart with 2 bronze oak leaf clusters, the French Croix de Guerre. But medals don't heal the mind. In the summer of 1945, Garlin Conner returned to Kentucky. There was a welcome parade in Clinton County. People applauded. Children waved flags. He was called a hero. And then he went home. And never spoke about the war again. Not with his wife, Pauline, whom he married in 1946. Not with other veterans. Not with his children. Not with anyone. He bought a 36-acre farm near Albany, Kentucky, planted tobacco, became president of the County Farm Bureau for 16 years, lived a quiet life, a simple life. But at night he had nightmares. He woke up screaming. He'd flee to the porch to smoke alone in the dark. He kept his medals at the bottom of a duffel bag, never displayed them, never showed them, never talked about them. Undiagnosed PTSD, because in 1945 there was no name for it. You just lived with it. And in 1998, at 79 years old, Garlin Murl Conner died of kidney failure and diabetes. He was buried in Kentucky, a quiet farmer, a turkey hunter, a man no one remembered anymore, except his widow, Pauline. She remembered. And she wasn't going to let her husband's story die with him. Pauline Wells Conner spent 22 years fighting for her husband's recognition. She gathered testimonies. She found military records. She pressured politicians. She wrote letters. She refused to give up because she knew the truth. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Wigetman, who commanded Garlin Conner in the 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment, wrote, "There is no doubt that Lieutenant Conner should have been awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions. One of the most disappointing regrets of my career is not having the Medal of Honor awarded to the most outstanding soldier I've ever had the privilege of commanding." The most outstanding soldier he ever had the privilege of commanding. And on June 26, 2018, 73 years after the Battle of Hussein, President Donald Trump posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor to Garlin Murl Conner. Pauline was there. She was 96 years old. She held the medal in her hands and cried. But Garlin Conner's impact goes beyond medals. On January 24, 1945, an entire American battalion was saved from annihilation because a 5'5", 120-pound Kentucky farmer knew how to disappear. Hundreds of men went home, married, had children, built lives, because Garlin Conner lay in a ditch and ordered fire on himself. The defensive line was held. The German advance was stopped. The Colmar Pocket was eventually eliminated. The Allies crossed the Rhine. Berlin fell. The war ended. And Garlin Conner returned to Kentucky, bought 36 acres, planted tobacco, hunted deer and turkeys, exactly as he did as a child. When someone finally asked him about the secret of his survival, how he managed to do what he did, his answer was simple. My father taught me to be fearless when I hunted. Fearless doesn't mean without fear. It means doing what needs to be done despite the fear. Because in the end, this is the story of Garlin Murl Conner, a poor farmer from the Great Depression who learned to hunt turkeys to feed his family, who went to war and discovered that the same skills that kept him invisible to birds could keep him invisible to entire armies, who used a spool of telephone wire as a hunting trail, who stayed completely motionless for 3 hours at -10°C with Germans passing meters away, who ordered artillery on his own position because he knew it was the only way to save his brothers, and who came home, kept his medals at the bottom of a duffel bag, and never spoke about it again. Because for Garlin Conner, it wasn't about glory. It wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about medals. It was about doing what needed to be done, exactly as his father taught him. If you found this story important, if you believe heroes like Garlin Murl Conner deserve to be remembered, please like this video. It helps YouTube's algorithm show these stories to more people. Subscribe to the channel for more forgotten war stories. And in the comments below, tell us, where are you watching from?